Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be talking about all of the looks that I've done with the Huda Beauty Icy Nudes palette. I have all of them here and I will put timestamps below if there's a particular one that you're interested in watching. After each look I will give you my thoughts on how all the shadows I used perform, and then at the very end I'll give you my final thoughts on the palette. Alright, so there is my first look using the Huda Beauty Icy Nude palette. I did play with this palette a little bit yesterday, but I didn't do like a complete look. I did two looks on, I did one look on each eye, and I didn't even finish them. I didn't take pictures or anything. But from that experience, I was very impressed with how the shadows applied. I felt like they performed better than I was expecting based on how they swatched. And today I'm equally happy. I'm very happy, especially with the mattes. Some of the mattes, when I swatched them, they felt silky, lightweight, airy. Some of them felt as if they weren't building well on top of each other, like on top of themselves as I was trying to build the swatches up. But my experience with using them on the eye is that they apply very nicely on the eye, and that's really not the same issue that I was having with my arm. Fallout from the mattes was, I didn't really even notice any fallout from the mattes. I did have a lot of fallout from the one shimmer that I used on the center of the lid. That was this one, and this one, it's not a very loose shimmer. It's pretty creamy, and when I first started applying it, I didn't feel like I was getting a lot of fallout. I have a feeling that what happened was my choice of brush probably wasn't the best. I used a flat brush like this. This is a synthetic flat shader. It's a Sigma. I can't remember the name here. I can't even see it anymore. I don't know. It's a Sigma brush. I don't think they make this one anymore. It is one of my favorites, but I think that it's too small, and I probably should have gone with something a little bit larger. This is another Sigma brush that's similar, but it's larger. An alternative to that is this is a Wet n Wild concealer brush, also synthetic and flat and kind of doesn't have a lot of give to it. So if I were to use that shade again, I would probably use one of those alternative brushes and possibly go in with a heavier hand all at once. I tried to build it up very slowly in many layers, and I think that may have contributed to that amount of fallout. I don't know. Just know that it has kind of a lot of fallout, and there's probably ways around that. And what else? I'm super happy with how smooth and how even the mattes look like on the outer corner. I very often have trouble with mattes looking patchy and being just kind of making my lids look more textured or grabbing onto texture and being more obvious. But these sit really nicely on my aging eyelids and they blend it out very nicely. So anyway, this first look came out pretty warm. I wasn't intending to go for a warm look. I was just going for shades that if I were using this as an everyday palette, not trying to like follow a theme or anything, these are shades I would gravitate towards in ways that I typically like wearing them. I tend to like the warmer shades on the outer part of the eye, deeper on the outer corner, shimmers on the center or the inner part of the lid. So that's just what I ended up with, and I'm gonna keep on playing with it. Okay, so there is the second look that I have now tried with this palette. So this one is all grays and one shimmer that's kind of a blue-purple shift. I started this out mainly wanting to see what this shade looked like against my skin tone. I was not sure if it would have enough depth to be able to be used as like a transition shade, and it's not really deep enough for that. It does almost match my skin tone, except that it's pretty gray toned. So what I did was use it as like an evening shade. I just tapped it over the inner part of my lid and then kind of worked it up into the crease a little bit. And I liked how it looked that way. I'll see what other ways I can keep using that shade. I thought it worked fine. And then I used these two shades. I used this one as a transition and then this one as a deepening shade on the outer lid. I also use this on the lower lash line. I felt like both of those worked pretty well. This one, I didn't notice much fallout from it. Like typically if I have fallout from a matte, it might be like kind of obvious clumps of fallout, and I didn't see any of that with this, but I did see some like shadowy darkness like right in the very outer corner. So I think there might have been just a little bit of fallout from that shade, but it wasn't very obvious. I also used this white shade again. This time I used it more heavily. The last time I used it, I used this peachy kind of shade on the inner corner because the undertone of that's actually really good as a corrector shade on me. It cancels out some of that greenish blue veining that I have there. And then I used this one over top to brighten. But today I didn't do that. All I used was this one. And I can still see some of that bluish veining through it. So going forward with this palette, I'll probably continue to use both of these two shades on the inner corner as a combo, just to cancel out discoloration and brighten at the same time. And I still like that white shade. That was the one that was a little funky when I was swatching, but still working just fine for me with actual use on the eye. Okay, and then the last shade that I used was this shimmery white. It looks like a white in the pan, but it has a bluish purple shift depending on the angle of the light. And I use that with a dry brush and then a little bit tapping some extra with my fingertip on my lid. I did get fallout from that shade, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the fallout from the shade that I used in the last look. It was much easier to clean up. There was less of it. The shimmer in this shade is kind of on the flakier side, but once I smooth it out on the lid, it's all like fine little particles. So I get kind of like a nice smooth sheen from that. Just using a brush, I get more of a sparkly effect, but using my fingertip, I got more of a smooth sheen out of it. Oh, and I wanted to mention something I almost forgot. This shade, it started to lift on the lid on one eye. So I did again what I did in the previous look where I used primer on one eye and no primer on the other eye. And I noticed that on the eye that I didn't use any primer, once I went in with that shimmer shade and I kind of dragged it over the deeper gray on the outer lid there, the shimmer, like the creaminess of the shimmer kind of lifted the gray shadow a little bit. So I went back in and added a little bit more just to kind of fix that. But that's something interesting about the formula, that it definitely needs the help of a primer to help it like really grab onto the lid so it doesn't move once it's placed. I didn't have issues with it moving when I was blending, just when I used that one creamy shimmer. So it's probably just the way that the two formulas were interacting with each other. But I really like this look. The only thing that's super unique about it is that blue shimmer. The grayish colors I probably could find in other palettes, but I do like that they have that purple undertone, which is a little bit different. It's not super common to find that. So far really enjoying this still, and I'm looking forward to doing a few more looks. So there's the third look. This one, I kept it pretty simple, and I ended up not really Loving how it turned out. I like the upper part of the lid, but I don't like that last little thing that I did where I put that gray on the bottom. I just feel like it looks a little unbalanced on my face, but that's fine. Most everything worked pretty well. I did try that gold shimmer on the lid originally with a dry brush, and I got kind of a lot of fallout just at the very start, and so I didn't want to go any further without using a setting spray. So I just picked up a little bit of shadow on my brush and then sprayed it with a setting spray and then continued to apply it to the lid. This eye got a little bit of dry brush application, but this eye was completely done with a damp brush, and it was like night and day fallout difference. I had much less fallout on this eye. And also in person, I feel like it looks smoother on the lid on this eye and a little bit more textured. It has that kind of encrusted, diamond encrusted texture on this eye where I applied it first dry, but it's not really easy to see that in photos. I did take photos of both eyes and I feel like it doesn't show up that well. Personally, in real life, I prefer this eye. What else? I don't have a whole lot to say about this look. It's just super simple. I really liked all the mattes. I feel like all the mattes were great. The one shimmer is not my super favorite. I wish it didn't have an amount of fallout where I feel like I have to use a setting spray to kind of keep the mess under control. I like the color, and I like that it's got some sparkle in it and fine shimmer, and I can definitely see the dimension of different types of sparkle in this. I think it's really pretty. I like the color. Just wish it didn't have so much fallout. So I don't know how many more looks I'm gonna do. I feel like there are a lot of things I could do with this palette, and there's a few shades I haven't dipped into yet. So probably whatever like looks I do going forward are just gonna be a mishmash of colors that are left that I haven't tried yet. They may not be cohesive looks. I just want to make sure I try pretty much everything in this palette before I give you my final thoughts on it. A little bit of fallout from that dark color, but not too bad. I'm having like a weird patchy spot right here in this area, and I'm not sure why. Maybe my primer kind of got stuck in that area and I didn't spread it out well enough, or maybe I need to apply the shadows in a different order. But so far this shade is the first matte that I'm not loving. This one right here, just the way that it looks on this side, it doesn't look as even as I would like. It's a little bit patchy. Maybe it would apply better without that primer underneath. I wasn't gonna do this originally. I was gonna do 2 different looks on each eye, but I'm gonna do the same look on this eye, but this eye I'm not wearing primer, and I'm gonna probably use the light shade first and then the dark shade in the reverse order, and hopefully it comes out a little bit better. Wow, that's so much better. It's a little bit less rich in color payoff, but much more even. not using that primer underneath it. I like this primer. This is the Alter Ego eyeshadow primer. It works really well for me in general, and it lasts really long on me, but for some reason, it doesn't always work with every eyeshadow formula, and it doesn't seem to work with this particular shade. It did work with other shades in this palette, so I don't know. I'm just gonna try this shade with some setting spray now. One more look, and I don't know what number I'm on anymore. I lost count. But for today's look, I wanted to use a few shades I hadn't dipped into yet, and I was a little bit inspired by the cover of the palette, which I think is really nice, really pretty. It's simple, but nice color choices. So I went with kind of similar colors as like this deep color, this lighter rosy shade, and then the silver. So kind of came out like the cover. And what I ended up using mainly was this one, and this one. And I also used a little bit of this glitter. It's a different type of glitter. It doesn't, the particles are kind of smaller than a traditional glitter and not as sparkly and reflective. There's a kind of a darkness to them. It's kind of strange, but it does give a nice, like, interesting texture that is not really similar to other products I have. So I'm not mad at having that. That's kind of a unique thing for me to have. As I said earlier, I don't know if I'm going to include this in the video, but the first matte that I've come across in this palette that I don't like that much is this one. So this is the shade that is all over the lid, and I don't know, it's like a little bit patchy depending on how I apply it. Over primer, I felt like it didn't work out too well over primer, but it was much better just over bare lids. That's not going to work for me because pretty much every eyeshadow I wear will crease like midday if I don't wear any kind of primer. So I will have to find a primer that works with this palette if I want to use that shade specifically. I didn't have problems with any of the other mattes and primer. And something else I found helpful was to apply the lighter mattes first and then go in with that deeper shade, and it seems to just blend out much more smoothly. What else? That silver shimmer, this one is like just a regular metallic, all small particles. It did help to wet the brush to get a nice shine. It felt like it was a little bit of a dampened kind of reflect just used with the dry brush. It had moderate fallout, not terrible, and it was pretty easy to clean up. The fallout on this was also very minimal. Surprisingly, I didn't get that much. If I were to use this on the upper lid, I'm not sure what the fallout might look like. And I guess the last thing is this shade. I did use this pink on the inner corner in the brow bone. It's so pale of a pink that it's hard to see it as pink. But it's a little bit different than just using it like that stark white that's right above it. So most stuff that I used today was okay except for that one matte. I may do 1 or 2 more looks, but I'm kind of getting close to wrapping this up. So I did another gray look, but this time I went a little bit lighter and I focused on using mainly this shade. I have used this one before and I did like it, and I liked it again today. Today I used a different primer. I used my ColourPop Party Proof eyeshadow primer, and I felt that it worked fine with this look. I do think that that gray shade applied slightly better over the primer. It just went on a little bit more evenly. It seemed to adhere a little bit better, and I got a little bit more like richness or depth of color with the primer underneath. I felt that shade blended out pretty well by itself, but I did go ahead and use this lighter gray around the edges. I feel like it's not super obvious to see that color. It does seem to lighten it up a little bit and add, I don't know, like a little bit of a haze around that gray, but it doesn't, it's actually kind of hard to see that shade on me. I do like it. Maybe one of these days I'll have to try this with like a pure bright white, like a cream or something along with it, to see if it'll show up a little bit better that way. And then I added a little bit of depth on the outer edges with this shade kind of like in the depths of the crease, and I just blended it out. I have used this shade before and I didn't like it that much, but I felt the way that I used it today, where I just used it very sparingly and kind of real blown out over another shade, I felt like it worked just fine. I didn't have any issues with patchiness or anything. And then over the center of the lid, I used this shimmer. This is the first time that I have tried this shade. It is a little bit different than the other shades in the way that it's formulated. It's a creamier, almost kind of waxy feel to it. And the shimmer comes off in like large flakes, like chunks of flakes. But if you smooth over them, they kind of end up breaking up, and then you get like a much finer shimmer out of it. So you can apply it different ways and get different effects with it. So I used it with just a flat shader like this, and using it that way gave me like kind of a sparkly kind of effect with where I could still see the color underneath it coming through. I really thought that looked nice, but I did go ahead and try to pat on some more with my fingertip, and that gave me a much more opaque metallic kind of look, and that was also very nice. I got some fallout from that shade, but it wasn't that bad. And it was easier to clean up than some of the other shimmers in this palette. And then I did use this shimmer as well on the lower lash line. Those two shades are not super different from each other. I feel like this one has a little bit more of a pink hue to it that is, it wasn't super obvious to me in the pan, but I see it on the eye more. So it's like a silvery pink. And then this one is more like, more of a true silver, but it's a warmer kind of silver. And the two, it's kind of easy to see that pinky shade on the top and then the more silvery shade on the bottom. It is easy to tell them apart. And this one is very similar in formulation to this one, where it's kind of flaky and chunky, but it breaks apart easily. And so you can apply it different ways. Fallout was very similar with this one as well. It's actually kind of a little bit chunky in the pan, and it was kind of making a little bit of a mess in the pan. That was the shade that was a little bit puffed up when I first swatched it, and I kind of just pressed it back down. So it's a little bit like crumbly in the pan in a way, but so far it's working fine for me. And I think that is about, oh yeah, I used one more thing. I used this shade as liner on the very like outer half of my lid. I do like that kind of softer gray liner. It's not as harsh as like a black liner, and I felt it worked fine just for that. So I could do more looks. I don't know if I'm going to do any more looks. I feel like I have a pretty good feel for what I think of this palette at this point. The things that I'm still not too sure about are this glitter. I don't know how that would work on the upper lid. It'd probably be fine. It worked fine on the lower lash line. And what else? I think that's about it. I'm pretty like comfortable with my opinion of this palette. So at this point, I would say I really like this palette. I don't love it. It's not my favorite. There are a few things that I don't enjoy about it. Namely, the fallout with some of the shimmers is more fallout than I would like. There are, seems like better formulations of shimmers nowadays. Most modern shimmers, it seems like, have improved to have less fallout, and they seem to adhere better to the lid. So when I see new eyeshadows come out where they have that problem where they just don't want to adhere to the lid, or they're just kind of difficult to clean up once you do get that fallout, it does kind of bother me. So I do have that issue with some of the shades in this palette. And then most of the mattes are beautiful here. I think that overall the matte quality is great in this palette, except for this shade, which is tricky. You have to apply it just right to get it to work well. And the other thing is the way the mattes are formulated, they kind of need a primer in order to get the best performance out of them. to get the best color, most even color on the lid. They have that tendency to dust away if you're too aggressive with blending, or if you go over them with like a creamier shimmer. So that is a little bit of an issue. Color Story I feel is really nice for a cool neutral kind of palette. Beautiful color story, well balanced, plenty of light shades, plenty of deeper shades, a nice variety of color in the shimmer also. Something unique that I found interesting about a couple of the shades in this palette, these two shades, I've tried using these as color correctors and not necessarily as eyeshadow, and they work fantastically well for that. So this shade I can use on the inner corner and also under the eye, like where I put concealer, to help cancel out that bluish greenish kind of tone. And it's actually not too dark on me, and it blends in super well with my skin tone, so I don't really see like a weird cast of color if I use it that way. And then I've also tried using this one more like on the outer corner as a color corrector. I do have a little bit more of a yellowy kind of discoloration at times there, and this pink kind of helps neutralize that so it doesn't look as obviously discolored. So, and the texture is really nice for using it. It really sits well on my skin. I don't feel like it looks heavy or dry or anything. So that's kind of a unique thing that I would find helpful for using as an everyday palette if that's something that you might need. And this brightener, this white shade, works pretty well as a white. Also works great just to brighten whatever other color you want to brighten. So I would say if you're interested and those drawbacks that I mentioned are not like deal breakers for you, I would say go for it. I think it's nice. Especially if you like cool neutrals. I think that you will like the Color Story. So there's my thoughts on that. I hope that this way of reviewing is helpful for you so you can see kind of how the shadows work in action and kind of get a more well-rounded opinion over many uses and tries. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.